All right, everybody. I've been thinking about doing this podcast for quite a while. As we know, going into the future, there's a lot of talk about hybrid and electrical vehicles and green energy. It's kind of a topic that's piqued my interest, considering that we're having so much of this shoved down our throat, and we're being told that we have to go green and use wind and solar, use hybrid batteries, and different technologies to go into the future because of climate change. I'm not going to address too much of climate change stuff in this podcast in particular. I might do one in the future. Alex Epstein is kind of the guy that I go to for a lot of that information because he seems to be able to pull a lot of stuff together. I just haven't sat down and really looked into that all that much. So we're just not going to touch that too much. Like I said, just not enough knowledge there yet. But you could plan on me doing one in the future. Um, so I wanted to do one on the whole topic of green energy and perhaps how inefficient it actually is when you start getting into some of this research and how some of the proposed mechanisms and different sources of energy that we're going to use actually are worse for the environment than what you would think. I think everybody's heard people say that a hybrid battery is a whole ton worse for the environment than the entire life cycle of a Hummer. I tried to kind of find that. I couldn't find anything definitive, but I remember in automotive school, which in a previous podcast I covered my history with automotive stuff and kind of how much or how I learned everything I know in that field. Um, my teachers always had, including my teacher for my hybrids class. Guy was incredibly smart, so I would take his word for it, but I just don't want to say anything that I can't verifiably prove. So we're going to cover wind and solar, nickel metal hydride batteries, lithium cadmium batteries, lithium ion batteries, and kind of those technologies and kind of their life cycles, how they affect the environment, and how it actually looks, and also energy prices and um, different sources of energy for different countries. So, without further ado, let's start rock and rolling here. Let me go. Okay, so I have a kid's website here just to kind of break it down in most simple of terms. Um, I simply literally Googled how does electricity get to your house. So they have a little breakdown here. Here's how electricity gets to your house. Electricity is made made at a generating station by huge generators. Generating stations can use wind, coal, natural gas, or water. The current is sent through transformers to increase the voltage to push the power long distances. The electrical charge goes through high voltage transmission lines that stretch across the country. It reaches a substation where the voltage is lowered so it can be sent into small power lines. It travels through distribution lines to your neighborhood. Smaller transformers reduce the voltage again to make power safe to use in our homes. These smaller transformers may be mounted on the poles or sitting on the ground. They're the big green boxes called the pad mount transformers. Connects to your house, passes through a meter that measures how much your family uses. The electricity goes to the service panel in your basement or garage where breakers or fuses protect the wires inside your house from being overloaded. Never touch the service panel is to be operated by your parents or a professional. Once again, it's a kid's website. The electricity travels through the wires inside the walls, down outlets, and switches all over your house. Just to kind of go a little bit more deeper there. Um, when you have such high amperages, the way that it was explained to me in college, and I found this very, very useful, is that you got to think of amperage as the speed at which the electricity is traveling, and the voltage as the pressure. So when you have such high voltage traveling through these huge lines, you need a lot of line to transfer a lot of pressure and a lot of speed. So when that all that voltage and that amperage is coming to your house, you can't just run a straight power line right into your house, or else you'll catch stuff on fire because the wires to power your lights, right? Your computer, your Xbox, your TV, whatever, those wires are so much smaller. So if you put all that amperage or that voltage through that, it would catch fire. Now we use fuses in the fuse plant panel or the breaker panel, whatever, to keep that from happening, right? It's a it's a safety device. That's what a fuse is. It's a safety device. It's meant to burn up and break the circuit before the component that that voltage and amperage is going to would catch fire. It's the same way in vehicles. So just to kind of get everybody on the same page and kind of understand why we have fuses and stuff like that. Circuit protection and why it's you have to have that kind of stuff, or else you'd be seeing a lot more fires. And not say that stuff still can't happen, but fuses are a relatively reliable and cheap way to protect circuits. So kind of moving on here, electricity explained. Electricity in the United States is produced, generated with diverse energy sources and technologies. In this website here, they just kind of break down where we get different energy sources and about rough percentages. Fossil fuels are the largest source of energy for electricity generation. Natural gas was the largest source, about 40% of US electricity generation in 2020. Natural gas is used in steam turbines and gas turbines to generate electricity. Coal was the third largest energy source for US electricity generation at about 19%. Nearly all coal-fired plants use steam turbines. A few coal-fired power plants convert coal to a gas to use in a gas turbine to generate electricity. Petroleum was the source of less than 1% of US electricity generation in 2020. Residual fuel oil and petroleum coke is used in steam turbines. Distillate or diesel fuel oil is used in diesel engine generators. Residual fuel oil distillates and can also be burned in gas turbines. So here they just kind of have a little graph showing you all the different energy sources. And as you can see, from 1950 to 2020, we've drastically increased the amount of energy that we used. In 1950, kind of read through this. I probably should have looked at this before I did the show, but just so everybody that's listening can hear, back in 1950, 155 billion kilowatt hours was used of coal, 45 billion kilowatt hours was used with natural gas, 0 billion kilowatt hours was used by nuclear, 101 billion kilowatt hours from the renewables, and petroleum and other was 34 billion kilowatt hours. Fast forward to 2020, we'll look at some of these numbers here. Coal was 774 billion kilowatt hours. Natural gas was 1,617 billion kilowatt hours. Nuclear was 790 billion kilowatt hours. Renewables, 792 billion kilowatt hours. Petroleum and other was 36 billion kilowatt hours. So just kind of once again breaking down the different energy sources that we've used since the 50s all the way to 2020. Right here, I'm a big advocate of nuclear. There's still a lot that I need to learn about it. From what I understand, it's a very, very safe source of energy, very reliable as well. The reason why that is because nuclear is so dense, right? When you think about it in terms of calories, right? Whatever it takes to raise the temperature of, I can't even remember what the heck it is, but oil is a very dense source of calories. So when you think about like olive oil, butters, different kinds of vegetable oils, let's say, to get a gram of that, right, is a very, very small amount, but it's very, very dense and very high in calories. So it's a lot of energy without a lot of space. When it comes to, fossil fuels or generating energy for machines, that's why they use oil and fossil fuels, because it's very, very dense. Just a little side tangent, but when it comes to consuming foods, you want to avoid eating a lot of oils because they're very calorically dense and they don't provide a lot of satiation. It's a lot of energy in a very, very small amount of space. Hopefully that makes sense to everybody, but just kind of a useful way to think about energy and calories. Nuclear energy provides 1/5 of US electricity. Nuclear energy was a source of about 20% of US electricity generation in 2020. Nuclear power plants use steam turbines to produce electricity from nuclear fission. Renewable energy sources provide an increasing share of US electricity. Many renewable energy sources are used to generate electricity and are the source of about 20% of total US electricity generation. As you can see here in this little graph, back in the 50s, wind and solar really weren't used all that much. And then now, as you can see over time, it's greatly increasing. And wind and solar, wind is 337.51 billion kilowatt hours, and solar is 90.89 billion kilowatt hours. Those are the two kind of big names in this whole renewable and green energy things, or green energy pushes, if you will. Um, so once again, this is just kind of a little breakdown. All the websites are always in the show notes, so I'll make sure I post this in there just for everybody to see. But that's kind of giving a little breakdown here in the U.S. of where our energy comes from, and how many kilowatt hours and different percentages, just how much we use as a country. So we're going to move on here and see the top 15 wind and solar power countries in 2020. Obviously, it's a little dated. It's 2022 at this point. So it's 2 years old, but this is all the data that I could find. And I'm sure it's probably not much different within 2 years, especially since you got COVID going around. I'm sure there's not as many people looking to change. Ember's recent global electricity review revealed that wind and solar produced 2,435 terawatts of electricity in 2020, providing almost a tenth of the world's electricity. Wind and solar have doubled since 2015, when they generated about 5% of the world's electricity. Some of the countries are generating significantly more electricity from wind and solar. The global leaders are Denmark and Uruguay, which generated 61% and 44% of their electricity from wind and solar in 2020. Just so we can see here, 61% of Denmark's energy comes from wind and solar. We're going to do a little bit more of a deep dive on that here in a minute, but I just kind of want everybody to see, who's the most prominent in this. Germany's up there as well. You see about 33%, and as I said earlier, Uruguay is 44%, Ireland's 35%. Excuse me, we're not going to talk about that too much, but mostly about Denmark and how it compares to us. It's pretty interesting. Wind and solar's global presence, many countries now get around a tenth of their electricity, the global average from wind and solar. India's 9%, China 9.5%, Japan 10%, Brazil 11%, the US is 12%, and Turkey 12%. I have a little thing highlighted here. Yep, Denmark all the way across the globe, 2020, 60.6% wind and solar share. It's where the US is 11.6% of the wind and solar share. So what does this mean? And, why should we really care about this? And who does the most kind of green and renewable source of electricity? And, is it reliable? Is it cheap? Should we do this going forward? I like to throw it back to Alex Epstein. We need to look at energy and different technologies in sources of human flourishing, as in what can we do to generate the most amount of human prosperity to allow people to do other things, right? Because if you're not worried about your basic needs, your energy, your food, your overall health, then you're free to do other things. If we look at this in like a market sense, right? If you're not busy just fighting to survive or fighting to pay your bills, then you're freed up to do other things that can bring more human flourishing, and we can make people's lives better through different means. If once again, we're not just consumed with having to, worry about our basic survival and how we're going to pay for our bills. So here, globalpetrolprices.com. Denmark electricity prices. We're going to discuss the price differences between the US and Denmark. So household per kilowatt hour averages out to about 0.336 kilowatt per hour, and businesses are 0.226, and Denmark is a little bit higher, just a little. Denmark, June of 2021, the price of electricity is 0.336 US dollar per kilowatt hour for households, and 0.226 US dollar for businesses, which includes all components of the electricity bill, such as the cost of power, distribution, and taxes. For comparison, the average price of electricity in the world for that period is about 0.138 US dollar per kilowatt hour for households and $0.126 for businesses. We calculate several data points at various levels of electricity consumption for both households and businesses, but on the chart, we show only 2 data points for households. The displayed number is calculated at the average annual level of household electricity consumption. For businesses, displayed data point uses per million kilowatt hour annual consumption. So we're going to go down to this little graph here. we could see once again, oh God, just like find the freaking needle in the haystack trying to find what the US was. And my dog just burst in. What's up, buddy? Um, the US 0.153 for US dollar per kilowatt hour in June of 2021. So the data, it's a little bit dated, but it's still relatively, I would say it probably hasn't changed much. I mean, obviously there's inflation and that kind of, you know, buffers things out a little bit, but you can kind of take this with a grain of salt. So we have a lot less green energy than Denmark does, but you can see our energy price is significantly lower. So once again, 0.153 US dollar per kilowatt hour. And then we go the whole way down here to Denmark and they're 0.336 per kilo or dollar per kilowatt hour. So that is literally over double the energy price to have green and you know, wind and solar energy sources to supply your energy to your country. So that's all fine and dandy, and I'm sure some people may not mind paying higher energy prices for, you know, if they think they're bettering the planet. But you know, nothing necessarily happens in a vacuum because there's different things. Once again, if you're more worried about spending money on electricity and, you know, the reliability of your electricity, then you're not free to do other things. We can create more human flourishing if we're able to, you know, give services and goods to people cheaper. So if they're using 66% of their energy comes from wind and solar, well, then that kind of, in my opinion, begs the question, well, how reliable is this energy? Because if you're not using wind or solar, then you have to use something that's more reliable, right? Like fossil fuels, nuclear, or whatever other energy source that proves to be more reliable. So we use, once again, a lot of natural gas for energy. So from Generac.com, which, okay, you could say biased, but whatever. Natural gas enough for over 100 years. The natural gas utility is historically very reliable with very few outages. Several recent studies conclude that the reliability of the utility of natural gas supply will continue to increase due to unconventional gas supply pipeline expansion improvements and operations. On-site diesel storage can provide 24 to 72 hours of runtime, refueling via truck dependent on availability of fuel and infrastructure following an event, weather crisis, or trucker strike. Natural gas pipeline can provide weeks to months of fuel. Biofuel generators, diesel and natural gas extend run times from days to weeks by supplementing on-site fuel storage with natural gas. MIT's study for improving energy security recommend the use of natural gas and biofuel generators for defense facilities. Natural gas pipeline network is robust. Historic outages are few, and unlike diesel, natural gas has no fuel maintenance issues. So just they have a little bit of articles here. Like I said, I'll put that stuff in the show notes just in case people are curious and kind of want to breeze through that. So here we're going to talk about the overall reliability of these energies, because if we're going to be using these, then obviously you want reliable, stable energy that you know, you can use, because if you don't have energy, well, you know, shit goes bad. Your food goes bad, you'll be cold, life is rough, right? People who don't have easily available access to energy, you're not going to flourish as much as you would if you had more readily available access to energy. So this is a study from nature.com, and we're going to just kind of breeze over some of the stuff here in the study, and I think it's going to surprise a lot of people with just how unreliable and yeah, just kind of the stuff that's out there about this. Geophysical constraints on the reliability of solar and wind power worldwide. Read the abstract and a little bit of the introduction. We'll just kind of keep rolling. If future net zero emissions energy systems rely heavily on solar and wind resources, spatial and temporal mismatches between resource availability and electricity demand may challenge system reliability. Using 39 years of hourly reanalysis data, 1980 to 2018, we analyzed the ability of solar and wind resources to meet electricity demands in 42 countries, varying the hypothetical scale and mix of renewable generation as well as energy storage capacity. Assuming perfect transmission and annual generation equal to annual demand, but no energy storage, we find the most reliable renewable electricity systems are wind heavy and satisfy countries' electricity demand in 72 to 91% of hours, 83 to 94% by adding 12 hours of storage. Yet even in systems which meet 90% of demand, hundreds of hours of unmet demand may occur annually. Our analysis helps quantify the power, energy, and utilization rates of additional energy storage, demand management, or curtailment, as well as the benefits of regional aggregation. So as you can see here, they're already kind of alluding to the fact that you're almost grasping at straws, because right now our energy is so reliable that we have very, very few outages. I don't know about that whole deal in Texas. That's something perhaps I should read up on a little bit more, but we're going to break down as to why wind and solar aren't as reliable, and perhaps we should shift our focus elsewhere because, once again, as they said right here, with 12 hours of storage, you're at 94%. And that's, once again, by adding 12 hours of storage. And how are you going to be able to do this? You need these enormous cells in order to store this kind of energy. So stabilizing mean global temperatures requires a global transition to energy systems with near zero or net negative carbon dioxide equivalent emissions. In cost optimized scenarios that accomplish this transition, solar and wind resources often supply a large share of electricity. Designing and operating a highly reliable electricity system that is dependent on such large shares of wind and solar generation can be a challenge, however, due to the variable, uncertain nature of solar and wind resources. So they're kind of saying here that you got to think about weather, right? Because in areas like here in Pennsylvania, where we have lots of snow and ice in the winter months, these wind and solar sources of energy are not going to be as reliable because you don't have the sun quite as much, and you're not going to have as much wind. The turbines could freeze. These solar panels really don't suck up as much energy as you would kind of hope. The efficacy of meeting electricity demands with generation from solar and wind resources depends on factors such as location and weather, the area over which generating assets are distributed, and the mix and magnitude of solar and wind generation capacities, the availability of energy storage, and firm generation capacity. Meanwhile, reliability standards in industrialized countries typically are very high, and they say right here targeting 2 or 3 hours of unplanned outages per year, or 99.97%. That's almost 100% reliability with the current energy model. And once again, they'd be asking you to take a hit on that down to 94% at very best. And you know that the government will get involved, so we should probably err on the side of, being a lot less reliable on that lower end. Resource adequacy planning for standards of 1 and 10 are also high. In North American, generating resources must be adequate to provide no more than 1 day of unmet electricity demand, or in some cases, 1 loss of load event in 10 years. An example, 99.97% or 99.9% respectively. We're not going to read this whole paper. We're just going to kind of breeze through some stuff to give you a little bit more information. This will be in the show notes if you want to read it. I read through a majority of it. And yeah, sometimes it's just like brain melting. Here we present a systematic analysis of the ability of specified amounts of solar and wind generation to meet electricity demands in 42 major countries across a range of assumptions associated with transmission, energy storage, and generation amounts. In particular, we assess spatial and temporal gaps between electricity demand and availability of solar and wind resources, which represents gaps that must be filled by other non-emitting generation technologies or operating strategies in reliable electricity systems based on zero carbon resources. The complementarity, geez, that's a big word, of renewable energy sources for this study is defined as hybridization of solar wind resources over a given area, here, countries, which we estimate the Kendall correlation coefficient of these resources across 39 years of resource data. Our goal is to identify the opportunities, complementarity, and challenges of variable renewable resources in greater detail than can be done by integrated assessment models that have multi-year time steps. Our results do not account for realistic power system specifications. Rather, we examine fundamental geophysical constraints on wind and solar dominated power systems independent of cost estimates. We do not mean to suggest that the temporal variability of such resources would ever make it physically impossible to meet a given electricity demand with enough capacity that solar and wind resources would be able to meet demand, but rather the extent of which such variability may determine the economic or socio-political feasibility of reliable systems. Our results thus will continue to be informative even as technological and socio-political feasibility evolves. So kind of breezing through here, here's the results. Go through some graphs. Once again, you guys can kind of dive into that if you want. I kind of want to get into the meat where they break down the reliability of these different energy sources. The most reliable generation systems right here. The colors in figure 2 show the reliability of electricity systems, the average percentage of electricity demand that is met each year from 1980 to 2018 based on only solar and wind resources for 18 major countries, 4 of each from Asia, Europe, Africa, and the Americas, and 2 from Oceania, horizontal axles of each panel, according to the mix of solar and wind generations, the level of annual generation relative to annual demand, and the capacity of energy storage relative to the mean electricity demand. Results for 24 other countries are shown in the supplementary figure 3, supplementary data. Figure 2a shows that without any excess annual generation energy storage, assuming perfect national transmission, which we know nothing is ever perfect, the most reliable mixes of solar and wind generation could potentially meet 72 to 91%, an average of 83% of electricity demand in these countries. Under these generation storage assumptions, the most reliable solar and wind generation mixes from 65 to 85% wind power, 73% on average, with countries with substantial desert like Algeria, Egypt, South Africa, favoring slightly more solar and less wind, 65 to 70% wind, with higher latitude countries like Russia and Canada favoring more wind. So once again, these are different geophysical restraints on kind of what wind and solar can do, because Canada and Russia, they get colder. Where if you go to countries like Africa or countries in Africa, those may not be as favorable. Different graphs here. Adding 3 hours of energy storage, but still without excess annual generation, increases the reliability so that the most reliable mixes meet 78 to 93% average, an average of 87% of electricity demand. So as you can see, the average with 3 hours of energy storage is 87%. If you add 3 hours of storage, which is only up about 4% on average. It's better, but it's not quite what you would hope as to our current energy, which is about 99.97% reliable. You're taking quite a hit there when you go to these energy sources. The share of solar generation in these most reliable mixes increases to 15 to 50%, 36% on average. However, the share of solar generation increases less or even decreases in higher latitude countries like Russia, Canada, and Germany. These trends tend to continue as more storage is added, so that with 12 hours of energy storage and no excess annual generation, 83 to 94%, an average of 94% of electricity demand is met with mixes of 10 to 70% solar power and 49% on average. If generating capacities are instead increased so that annual generation exceeds annual demand in each country by 50%, but without energy storage, the most reliable mixes meet 83 to 99%, an average of 94% of electricity demand. The 1.5 times generation most reliable mix is substantially more reliable than 1 times generation systems built, but include more wind, 70 to 90% wind power, 78 on average. These overbuilt systems are more reliable in all of these 18 countries than the systems with 12 hours of energy storage, but no excess generation. Adding energy storage systems whose generation is 1.5 times annual demand again increases both the system's reliability, 89 to 100%, average 98%, and the share of solar generation most reliable mixes have 10 to 60% solar and 36% on average. So basically what they're saying is that you would have to have a very, very large surplus of energy generated from these systems in order to meet the demand. So you can see these are incredibly optimistic standards that they're hoping to meet, because as we know, nothing ever is 100% efficient. And on top of that, it would be you would need to add insane amounts of storage, which require a lot of space to store said energy from relatively unreliable energy sources. Um, the unmet demand. The scatter plots in Figure 3 show the relationships among reliability, energy storage, excess annual generation, and country's land area for the most reliable solar wind mixes of all 42 countries annualized. Um, the linear fits in each panel show that solar wind systems are generally less reliable in countries with smaller land areas. Specifically, our results across countries indicate that the reliability of solar wind systems that lack energy storage increases by 7.2% for every factor of 10 increase in the land area. This relationship further suggests that the improvement in reliability that might be expected by expanding transmission systems within large countries. However, excess annual generation tends to alleviate the disadvantage of small country area more than energy storage. This can be seen by comparing the slopes of the lost my place of linear fits in panels Figure 3, C, and D. In addition, within each country, to compare the gains in reliability from excess annual generation and energy storage, a nonlinear function was fit to the reliability given the land area, the level of annual generation, and the capacity of energy storage. Our results indicate that a 10% increase in excess annual generation is equivalent to 3.9 hours of energy storage, which you can see that only increased the overall reliability by about 4%. Keep reading through here. Figure 3 also points to the natures of systems unreliability. The color of bubbles indicates the average number of events which are to be unmet demand, at least 24 contiguous hours, i.e. long duration gaps. In systems that meet 95% of a country's demand, countries of such long duration gaps often remain each year. In some countries, excess annual generation reduced the number of such long duration gaps by adding 12 hours of energy storage. They want you to compare Sweden, Australia, and Russia. Keep reading. Figure 4 further characterized the magnitude and duration of unmet demand in 16 major countries, and they remove African countries for Figure 18 for symmetry, with curves showing gaps of different system configurations ordered by their magnitude and according to the number of hours each year that such a gap occurred. For example, the pale people's curve, or the pale purple curves, show that systems with no excess annual generation and 12 hours of energy storage consistently have gaps in which 50% of the demand is unmet for 1,000 hours per year. Pale green curves show that systems with 50% of excess annual generation and 12 hours of energy storage may have much smaller and shorter gaps in some countries. We'll just kind of keep rolling through here. Talk about the benefits of sharing resources, which brings up different arguments, people all about free trade tariffs. Our results suggest that neglecting transmission constraints with systems sized to meet time-integrated annual electricity demand in major countries' solar and wind resources could meet at least 72% of instantaneous electricity demand without excess annual generation or energy storage. For instance, the contiguous U.S., a solar wind power system could provide 85% of total electricity demand, which is consistent with the prior studies and reports. Solar and wind resources can achieve greater levels of reliability by adding energy storage, increasing deployed capacities, or pulling resources to contiguous multinational regions. However, the marginal improvements in reliability related to these options differ considerably across countries and regions according to their land area and geophysical resources. I know it's a whole lot and it's a pretty deep dive, but as you can see, these, as they dive more and more in on these different energy sources, you need to have a lot of storage, and it's just not nearly as reliable as our current energy systems. And this all depends on kind of how you're looking at the overall goal for energy. So if you want to protect the environment, right, and we don't know how much this is going to change the environment and how much we've really had an impact on the environment, you have to deal with quite a bit of energy outage, and you're going to have to use more reliable ways of sourcing your energy, which comes from natural gas. I don't think it's appropriate to say that we should go all in on wind and solar when, as we can see, they're just not nearly as reliable, and you need to have substantial amounts of energy storage. And then even then, you're still about 5% off of having the same reliability that we have now. Because I'm sure everyone can attest, yeah, you have power outages, but they never last that long. That's because we have very, very reliable energy right now. Now, if you have wind and solar, you're going to have to store that energy by yourself, and you're going to have to take up a lot of space with said cells or whatever can hold that energy, versus now where you just deal with an outage very, very rarely, and it's usually a couple hours at most. So kind of moving on from here, I want to talk about electric vehicles and kind of their effect on the environment. So this is from E&E News, talking about electric vehicle sales. Electric vehicle sales have doubled. Is a tidal wave coming? Don't think so. They make up about 2% of market share, and that was a couple of years ago that I heard that. I don't want to read through all this because it's going to bore everybody more than you're probably already bored out of your mind. Electrical vehicle sales are booming in the U.S., with purchases nearly doubling over a year ago. That trend is chipping away at the long-held narrative that drivers aren't ready for electric cars. It's leading to some analysis to recalibrate their predictions. Last year, electric vehicles accounted for 2% of all car sales. This summer, that number nearly jumped to 5% of light-duty vehicles like SUVs, sedans, and more than 20% of all passenger vehicle sales, according to the recent data. However, higher adoption of EVs could stall without stronger federal and state policies, advocates warn, hampering President Biden's goal of decarbonizing the sector by mid-century. Still, the recent uptick in sales is notable, stemming in part from a proliferation of vehicle models across manufacturers, increased consumer awareness, and government support. Electric vehicle sales are pretty much going gangbusters, said Ryan Galatine, a policy director at Advanced Energy Economy. You see automakers moving to start building EV on the assembly plants and announcing these new battery manufacturing facilities. It says they're betting their business on electric vehicles. I won't read through all this, but I can honestly say in my personal life as a automotive technician, I really do not see that many people buying electric vehicles, and I really don't see that many in my shop. To kind of give a tip of my hat to them, they are pretty reliable. Honestly, in my opinion, hybrid vehicles are incredibly reliable. I don't work on them all that much. They don't really seem to break. The hybrid systems in them are pretty damn bulletproof, to be completely honest. In my entire career, which spans about 10 years, I really have not seen that many people tearing into hybrids. I think I had one guy that had to rip into one once, but that was actually due to an accident. We didn't have gloves. The regulations surrounding hybrid gear and how it has to be maintained is pretty ridiculous. So we're going to dive into a study here, comparative life cycles and environmental impact analysis of lithium ion and nickel metal hydride batteries. So what's the difference between these two? Lithium ion is mostly used in, like, your AA, AAA, whatever. I'm sure you see them all over the grocery store where it says lithium ion. Nickel metal hydride batteries are the batteries that are actually mainly used in hybrid vehicles. So why is this important? Well, if we're going to be using all these hybrids to supposedly improve the environment, then we should know, are these batteries themselves affecting the environment, and how are they doing that? And maybe should we consider other kinds of batteries? Read the abstract here, and we'll kind of dive into the science relating around these batteries and kind of get a better hold on what should we advocate for going forward. So the abstract here says batteries have been extensively used in many applications. However, very little is explored regarding the possible environmental impacts for their whole life cycle. Even though a lot of studies have been carried out for augmenting performance in many ways, this research paper addresses the environmental effects of two different types of batteries, lithium ion and nickel metal hydride batteries, in terms of their chemical constituents. Life cycle impact analysis has been carried out by CML, which is the Institute of Environmental Sciences. I had to look that up like a million times because I kept forgetting what it meant. I couldn't find what CML meant, but apparently it's just the Institute of Environmental Sciences. The recipe, ecopoints, 97 IPCC, and CED methods. The impacts are considered in categories such as global warming, eutrophication, freshwater aquatic ecotoxicity, human toxicity, marine aquatic ecotoxicity, and terrestrial ecotoxicity. The results reveal there's significant environmental impact caused by nickel metal hydride batteries in comparison with lithium ion batteries. The reason behind these impacts is a relatively large amount of toxic chemical elements which are present in the constituents of nickel metal hydride batteries. It can be anticipated that a better environmental performance can be achieved through optimization, especially by cautiously picking the constituents, taking into account toxicity aspects, and by minimizing the impacts related to these chemicals. So an introduction here real quick. Batteries are important to run the modern world, providing energy for sectors and products from large-scale industries to electric vehicles and the smallest electronic items. They're ubiquitous backup to retain uninterrupted supply of power. Batteries can be classified as non-rechargeable primary batteries or rechargeable secondary batteries. Lithium-ion and nickel metal hydride batteries are popular rechargeable batteries among many more. Nowadays, the use of rechargeable batteries has increased due to more popular portable electronics and sensors such as mobile phones, cameras, electric vehicles. Moreover, the Internet of Things, or the Internet of Things relies mostly on batteries for autonomous power supplies. Thus, the total power capacity of batteries was 800 milliwatt in 2014, up to 4,000 milliwatt by 2022. The increased usage implies the expansion of end-of-life disposal of the exhausted batteries. These batteries contain cadmium, lead, mercury, copper, zinc, manganese, lithium, or potassium, which are extremely hazardous to the environment regarding toxicity and human health effects. These chemicals are unhygienic and can affect the environment severely. Therefore, it is essential to quantify the possible environmental impacts for the whole life cycle of lithium-ion nickel metal hydride batteries to save the environment and to guide policymakers and researchers. The life cycle assessment of environmental hazards from lithium-ion nickel metal hydride batteries is not an easy task, as it considers effects from raw material extraction to battery manufacturing to end-of-life recycling batteries. It is necessary to do a vast literature review on the life cycle of lithium-ion nickel metal hydride batteries to find out the dangerous emissions over their entire life. The identification and estimation of various kinds of releases to air and land for various constituents and energy consumptions during the battery's lifetime is critical. Moreover, it is necessary to use the appropriate state-of-the-art methods for calculating and comparing the effects. So basically, they're just saying that they're going to assess these different batteries' life cycle, which is something you don't really often hear. You hear people talk about the life cycles of cows, supposedly how it's so bad for the environment. That's a whole other show, and but these batteries, nickel metal hydride batteries, which are the most dominant batteries in hybrid vehicles, are very, very bad for the environment, as we're going to see. So right here in a little graph, you can see they have lead acid batteries, which are kind of like the batteries that are mostly in vehicles now. They have absorbed glass mat, which are kind of different, but lead acid batteries are obviously the most popular one. Lithium ion has increased quite a bit. Nickel cadmium has gone quite down from 1995. Sorry, I should preface that with this graph is from 1995 to 2015. And we have a slight increase in nickel metal hydride because, again, we have more and more hybrid vehicles since 1995, obviously. Keep scrolling on here. We'll find you'd be surprised the difference in the actual impact that these batteries have on the environment. So we get all the way down here. Once again, I will have this study here in the show notes. So this is a comparative inputs and outputs of lithium ion and nickel metal hydride batteries. You could just see on this graph the inputs from nature, outputs to air, outputs to water, outputs to soil, and outputs to solid waste. The only area where your lithium ion batteries are worse for overall is outputs to solid waste. So inputs from nature for lithium ion are very, very little. And, you could see on this chart here for those listening, the chart is, it's the nickel metal hydride batteries are exponentially, they require exponentially more inputs from nature to be made than lithium ion. The outputs to air, The nickel metal hydride is about twice that of lithium ion batteries. So they're about twice as bad for the air. If you go to outputs to water, they're almost 4 times worse for the water than lithium ion batteries are, and outputs to soil, it's about the same deal, about 3 times worse for the soil than outputs to soil. So you can see this stuff's really not that good for the environment. Rolling here, or actually, we'll read from this real quick. The results obtained from the CML method show a comparative analysis between nickel metal hydride and lithium ion batteries are based on 10 impact categories. According to the analysis results presented in Figure 9, nickel metal hydride batteries have significant impact on global warming, human toxicity, marine aquatic ecotoxicity, and acidification. As the comparative results are presented herein as percentages, it is evident that nickel metal hydride contributes nearly 100% for most categories, where lithium ion contributes much less. Lithium ion batteries have a significant impact on global warming, 40%, human toxicity 45%, marine aquatic ecotoxicity 83%, and eutrophication 68%. Table 5 so the global warming value is 7.3 kilograms for CO2 equivalent, and lithium ion is about 1.9 by 10 from nickel metal hydride batteries. The human toxicity value from lithium ion batteries 7.38 kilograms. I won't continue reading that because that'll just make everybody's head spin. But just you keep rolling through this stuff and it doesn't look good for nickel metal hydride batteries. Another graph, you can see all of the effects of nickel metal hydride batteries are very, very bad. I mean, even it's exponentially worse than lithium ion batteries. The recipe method here, based on endpoint indicators utilized here for conducting LCA analysis of 2 different types of batteries. The analysis results in Figure 10 show significantly higher results for nickel metal hydride batteries. As results, percentage values here, the impact on ecosystems and human health from nickel metal hydride batteries are nearly 100%, whereas from lithium ion batteries, the impact is less than 10%. Once again, on ecosystems and human health, their nickel metal hydride batteries, which are the main batteries in all these hybrid vehicles, are 10 times worse than lithium ion batteries. More graphs, it's beating a dead horse at this point, that how much worse nickel metal hydride batteries are for the environment, for human health, and the overall environment. Some more graphs here. It's really not looking good. So stop the screen share here and kind of round out the podcast. I know this is probably a long, boring, a little bit of a dredge kind of podcast that you had to trudge through, but it's really important that if we're going to use these technologies, that we use technologies that are safe, that aren't horrible for the environment. I gave you all the science. You use that information as you will. I think if we're going to use hybrid vehicles, which I'm all for because I think they're very reliable, I like a lot of the hybrid vehicles that are out there right now. If we're going to use them, then we need to make them as environmentally friendly as possible because that's the stated goal, right? So if we're not going to do that, then what are we doing? Are we just virtue signaling and just saying that, hey, look, we made electric vehicles for the sake of making electric vehicles? I don't know. You guys can kind of decide that for yourselves. I hope you enjoyed this one. I hope it was informative. I know it's probably a little bit boring and dry compared to maybe the usual interview or other podcasts, but this information needs to be put out there. And, once again, if we're going to advocate for the environment and for the overall health of the planet, that we need to do that in the best way possible. And I think that we need to also consider human flourishing in that. And if we're using batteries that are bad for the environment and bad for our overall health and advocating for energy sources that aren't reliable, then we have a lot less human flourishing, which allows people they're preoccupied with overall survival and quality of life rather than just doing things that make, investing, working, or doing other things that can produce more human flourishing. So, like I said, I hope this is informative. I hope everybody enjoyed, regardless of how dry and boring it is to listen to me read study after study after study. But hopefully you came away with something. And if you guys like me doing these kind of shows, just let me know, shoot me a message. And if you have any questions about this kind of stuff, I'll do what I can to help you out. But until next time, everybody, take care.